The October morning at Stonegate Prison began as normal. At precisely 7:30, an armored corrections van entered via the massive gates. From a window of her third-floor office in the administration building, Silas Creighton, idly stirring her long cold coffee, watched it approach. Like herself, she was the model of discipline and order at her workplace. On the enormous wood desk, each folder was positioned exactly parallel to the edge. The alignment of the computer display was flawless. Mathematical accuracy was even used to hang the window curtains. Silas Creighton, I had spent 25 years in the prison system and had come to appreciate order above all else. Rowan Vexley, who was transported from the Louisiana State Penitentiary, was the sole prisoner taken on today's trip. For a week, his file had been on the warden's desk. He is 34 years old, educated in college, found guilty of big fraud, 15 years, impeccable conduct, worked at the library at the jail. After adjusting her flawlessly groomed, graying hair, Silas made her way to the reception area. The rhythm of her heels on the concrete floor was constant. As she went past, the guards stood alert. In that order, she was feared and revered. Greetings from unseen true crime story headquarters. I appreciate your support as we continue to grow and provide both untold and told real crime tales every day, viewers and subscribers in particular. Remember to subscribe to this channel. Vexley looked like a tall, healthy-looking guy with regular features and brown eyes that were focused. Despite having his wrists in handcuffs, he carried himself with a certain calm dignity. Silas's voice was cool and silky. Welcome to Stonegate, Mr. Vexley. Mrs. Creighton, I am the warden. We demand that our stringent regulations be adhered to. Yes, ma'am, he said in a lovely but somewhat scratchy voice. You'll be employed in our library. One may quickly lose this privilege. You will be placed on the general block for any offense. Vexley gave a little nod. A little grin appeared on his face, as if he found his superior's severe demeanor amusing. Stonegate was proud of its library, which included 15,000 books, a computer catalog, and a large reading room. For prisoners who desired an education, courses were offered there. The new convict was sent to Warden Jace Monroe, a young lady with a sharp eye and a military demeanor, after Silas personally handled the paperwork. Silas returned to her office and took another look at Vexley's paperwork. It worried her in some way. Maybe it was his very direct glance or that little smirk. There was no room for arrogance in prison. That was the first thing you discovered while incarcerated. The day proceeded as normal, with staff meetings, reports, and grounds visits. Stonegate has its own set of regulations. Both the personnel and the inmates were arranged in a hierarchy. Silas was aware of all the unspoken guidelines and understood how to apply them to maintain discipline. She ran into Vexley again at the library in the evening. He was taking notes in a diary and carefully organizing the volumes. He moved with assurance and precision, as if he had been doing it his whole life. How is your adjustment going? She paused at a shelving unit and inquired. Without pausing his work, he said, I'll figure it out, but the cataloging system is a little different from what I'm used to. Your library of old books is excellent. Silas hummed. On the first day, inmates often didn't notice such features. Dryly, she added, I hope you live up to the recommendation, and made her way out. He replied after her, I certainly will, Mrs. Creighton, with that little smirk returning to his voice. Silas was already at her office when she found herself reviewing his file once again. There was definitely a problem with this Rowan Vexley, something she was still unable to identify. In her jail, Silas Creighton disliked mysteries. Dusk was deepening outside the window. Stonegate was getting ready to go dark. The prisoners were summoned to their cells by a siren that sounded somewhere in the rear of the jail structure. It was the conclusion of another day. The well-oiled system had gained another prisoner. Silas had no idea that this day would mark the start of a tale that would permanently alter her life. A month went by. The library was swiftly organized by Rowan Vexley. Pedantic precision was used to update the catalog. The reading area was always spotless, and on checkout day, books were put back on the shelf. There was nothing for even the pickiest wardens to complain about. Under the guise of checking in, Silas began to frequent the library. She saw how deftly Vexley interacted with the other inmates. He never raised his voice, and his demands were dutifully fulfilled. She spent more time at the library that night than usual. Vexley paused at the classic literature shelf as she was organizing books in the far corner. "You've rearranged the classics section," she said, tracing the spines with her finger. "Yes." He stepped closer and murmured, "By chronology of works. That makes it simpler to follow the evolution of literary trends." An intriguing strategy. Silas took a battered copy of Jane Austen from a shelf. "It's been a long time since I read it again." Prejudice and Pride? Or Emma? He seemed sincere in his curiosity. "Persuasion," she said, pausing. "How familiar are you with her work?" He shrugged. "I studied English literature in college. My thesis focused on Jane Austen. She has an exceptionally precise insight of human nature." Their conversation lasted about an hour. Vexley turned out to be an intellectual, excellent conversationalist with a keen intellect and a surprising sense of humor. To Silas's astonishment, he spoke passionately about literature. Their chats became routine after that night. They exchanged their thoughts on poetry, debated contemporary literature, and spoke about Dickens and Thackeray. Silas found herself anticipating these discussions. She once said, "You don't look like a financial swindler. How should a financial scammer appear?" He grinned. "Perhaps a shark-smiling dude in a fancy suit?" She gave him a close look. "However, I'm by no means an expert in Victorian literature. Paradoxes abound in life, Mrs. Creighton." He looked at her. "There are moments when we are unaware of our own abilities." She felt uneasy for a moment as something flashed in his brown eyes, but it was over soon after. It was Jace Monroe who first saw the shift in her boss's behavior. "Mrs. Creighton, I was at the library almost every evening and was smiling more." Jace heard their hushed, almost personal laughter one day. When she and Jace happened to cross paths in the dining room, the prison doctor, Dr. Alaric Voss, once remarked, "He's a manipulator. I've seen some of them. He is adept at making himself at home." Jace said nothing. She wasn't going to talk about her with anybody since she was loyal to her employer. Silas saw that she was thinking about the library more and more, the peaceful nights spent surrounded by books, the leisurely chats, the challenge in his brown eyes, and the expression in them. She understood that these discussions went beyond what was typically spoken between a warden and a prisoner. She didn't feel like obeying the rules, however, for the first time in years. "Did you read this?" He held out a book to her and asked once. For a minute, their fingertips met. As though burnt, Silas snatched her fingers away. The library was silent save for the sound of their breathing. "Time is running out," she replied suddenly. "It's time to shut down the library." He gave her a wordless nod, but his expression indicated that this was only the start of something she wasn't yet able to or wanted to define. Silas had a hard time falling asleep that night. She reflected on the ease with which her flawless reputation might be destroyed, the brittleness of the boundary between chaos and order, and the fact that certain things were best left unsaid. However, it was too late. Silas Creighton had unwittingly become the protagonist of the narrative, which had started to build its own storyline. It was a really frigid December. Even the outdated heating system was unable to withstand the chilly wind, and the jail walls seemed to be frozen solid. Silas defended her presence in the jail after lights out by claiming that she often remained late in her office, looking over paperwork by the light of the desk lamp at the very least. She spent a lot of time that night staring at herself in the workplace restroom mirror. 53 years of age. The lines around her eyes were now more obvious. Silas had long since determined that dyeing her hair was a show of weakness. Therefore, it no longer concealed the gray in her hair. Her still slim physique fit the minimalist outfit well. She was upset with herself after seeing her mirror adjusting her hair. It took precisely 4 minutes to get to the library. Silas was aware of every security camera and every bend. "I was aware that between 10 and 10:15, there was a security shift in the west hallway. Was aware that Jace Monroe was in charge of the other flank. That information ought to have been concerning, but for some reason it simply made her blood boil. She found Rowan waiting for her. In some way, he always knew when she would arrive. He read at the distant table, which was illuminated by the lone bulb. He glanced up and grinned, that unique smile that made Silas gasp when he heard her approach. As she took a seat across from him, he said, "I was thinking about our conversation yesterday, regarding free choice and fate's predestination. And what were your conclusions?" She spoke in a raspy voice. "That we sometimes already have our choices chosen for us. The only thing left to do is to accept them." His fingers nearly touched her hand as they moved across the table. Silas did not retreat. "Mr. Vexley, those are dangerous thoughts." "Rowan," he said gently, "I want to hear my name when we're by ourselves." He had already grasped her hand, but she shook her head. For a prisoner, his hand was remarkably soft and warm. "This is insane," she said. He could have agreed. But isn't that what makes it so beautiful? Among the dusty books of classic literature, in the semi-darkness of a library, the first kiss took place. It had been hesitant, almost chaste. As if she were a delicate gem, Rowan gave her a kiss. There were more nights after that. Other kisses are no longer so innocent. Touches that made her feel lightheaded. Whispers in the dark. The constant fear of being discovered only heightened the senses. By day, Silas was the same as before, a difficult, demanding employer. She conducted meetings, punished irresponsible personnel, reviewed cameras. But suddenly, there was a mystery in her life that tinted the dreary daily with vibrant colors. Rowan was changing too. He seemed distant while the other prisoners were around, but when they were alone themselves, the mask came off. He told her about his early years spent in a tiny Oregon town, his aspirations to pursue a career in writing, and how his need for quick cash had landed him in prison. One day, as they were sitting in the library's silence, he said, "I have no regrets. I never would have met you if it weren't for all of this." Every time they met, Silas understood it was a step into the abyss. She made an effort to avoid the attraction. She made the decision to break up with him many times. Her feet, however, brought her to the library each evening. Dr. Alaric Voss visited the administrative wing more often. During general meetings, she watched Silas with interest. She once attempted to bring up the odd conduct of some of the prisoners, but Silas interrupted her in the middle of her statement. Jace Monroe was also in agreement. After the lights went out one day, she ran into the warden outside the library. Silas saw a tacit pledge of confidentiality in the young warden's eyes as their gazes locked. At the same time, they were becoming closer to Rowan. The library was no longer the only place they met. Silas's workspace. Classrooms are empty. All of these areas, even the ancient rear room, had preserved their secrets. After a particularly dangerous incident, Silas would advise us to exercise more caution. "Do you feel afraid?" He would kiss her neck and ask. No, it was true that she would respond. She had no fear of shame or publicity. What was happening to her heart made her fearful. Silas slept in her empty bed every night and considered the issue. She searched for the point at which the prisoner Rowan Vexley was reduced to merely Rowan, a guy whose image made her shudder. Then the thing she was most afraid of occurred. She spoke these words aloud one morning while gazing into the mirror. "I'm smitten with him." She should have been terrified and sobered by that revelation. However, a peculiar sense of comfort replaced the terror. She seemed to have finally given up trying to go against the flow and let the river to take her. She arrived to the library earlier than usual that night. Rowan seemed to see the shift in her. He just wrapped his arms around her and drew her in without saying anything. And that hug contained more than all the words combined. Outside the library window, snow was falling. The heating pipes hummed somewhere deep inside the jail. For the first time in years, Stonegate prison warden Silas Creighton felt fully alive as he stood in the arms of a prisoner. She was unaware that her previous existence will end this winter, that everything will be irreparably changed shortly, that these happy times would come at an unthinkably expensive cost. For the time being, however, she just stood closed-eyed and listened to the pulse of a man she had no right to love. Snowstorms and temperatures far below freezing were common in January. It was drafty in the ancient jail structure. The personnel made an effort to remain near the heaters while the inmates were covered with blankets. But Silas didn't seem to notice. Alaric Voss could not put out the fire that flared within her. They met with Rowan almost every day. He always knew how to distract the other prisoners, and she had mastered the art of making excuses for late checks. The light from the security cameras didn't reach the hidden corners of the library, which were only known to them behind the shelves of legal volumes. In an old catalog box-lined little back room. Have you ever imagined that you could do this? As they slept on a library plaid that was stretched out on the floor, he inquired once, "What precisely do you do?" She traced a weird design that resembled a Celtic charm on his breast with her finger. Such carelessness. For fervor. If it means losing everything. Silas said nothing. She had long since ceased questioning what she was doing. She gave herself permission to just feel for the first time in her life. Jace Monroe had first spotted them together in mid-January. She was checking the hallway before lights out and noticed an odd noise coming from the library. She opened the door to see her boss leaning against a bookshelf. She moved her head back and closed her eyes as Rowan kissed her neck. Jace covered the door and backed away softly. Her cheeks were burning, but not because she was embarrassed. From the understanding of accountability. 5 years before, when the young warden was accused of abusing his position of authority, Silas had saved her career, she said. It was time to return the favor. Jace became their unofficial protector after that day. She planned safe time slots, distracted the other wardens, and just so happened to be in the appropriate hallways. Silas never discussed it with her openly, but sometimes their eyes locked, and the warden gave a little gesture of trust and gratitude. And Rowan was different. When he gazed at Silas, his motions had a certain gentleness. He could go on for hours about his life, his travels, the people he had met, and the literature that had shaped him. "What's the most incredible thing, do you know?" One night, he said, "Here, with you, I feel more liberated than I ever did outside." Silas recognized him. She had also never felt so genuine, so alive. It was as if she had been wearing a mask for her whole life, and now she could finally remove it. They were becoming more irrational in their enthusiasm. They remained longer and longer and took more and more chances. When Dr. Alaric Voss suddenly went to the medical office one day for her misplaced keys, they almost got caught. There was hardly time for Rowan to hide in a cupboard. When the threat had passed, Silas said, "This madness has to stop. Do you truly want this?" Pulling her to him, he asked. She didn't respond. Both of them were aware of the solution. The events Silas dreaded most occurred in early February. She started making plans for the future, envisioning what would occur after Rowan's release. She was already fantasizing about the lake home, the peaceful nights spent together, and the prospect of just being together, even if he still had 11 years remaining on his sentence. He once said, stroking her cheek with his finger, "When you smile, you get wrinkles around your eyes." "I'm growing older," she smiled. "You're stunning." He gave each wrinkle a kiss. "Just as you are." Silas attempted to picture the conclusion on the few occasions when she was alone herself. At times, she believed she saw ominous, terrifying shadows of the future. However, all of the worries vanished in the morning. The desire to see him, to touch him, to hear his voice was all that was left. After then, something occurred that completely altered the situation. Rowan was especially thoughtful one evening. After examining her graying hair in silence for a while, he spoke the following quietly. "You should be aware of one thing about me." He didn't have enough time to finish, however. They had to run out when they heard footsteps in the corridor. Silas was given the results of a standard medical checkup the next day. Later, Jace Monroe noted that the mood in the jail shifted that day. The temperature seemed to have fallen by a few more degrees, as though the shadows had become more dense in the corners, as though the very hand of fate was holding its breath, ready to strike. However, nobody was aware of the impending storm that would destroy everything in its path, and that enthusiasm would come at an unfathomably expensive cost. Like a ticking time bomb, the envelope with the test results was resting on Silas's desk. Silas could tell by the expression on her face that something was wrong. Dr. Alaric Voss had delivered it personally. "Please take a seat, Mrs. Creighton." The doctor's voice was unusually quiet. Silas ran her eyes over the lines of the medical report. Numbers, terms, and acronyms blended into a blurry stream. Only 2 words stood out as if written in blood red. HIV positive. It's a mistake. She didn't recognize her own voice. We checked again. 3 times. Dr. Alaric Voss hesitated. Mrs. Creighton Silas, you must remember every interaction from the previous. Go away from me. It sounded like a whiplash order. Silas was left sitting quietly, gazing into the empty room. Phrase fragments whirled about in her mind. You should be aware of one thing about me. I don't regret anything. If all of this hadn't happened, waves of rage came. She recalled every kiss, every night, every touch. He was aware. He had known all along. It was 9 o'clock when she went inside the library. Sharp. Rowan was at his customary workstation, reading. When he saw her face, he raised his head and grinned, but the smile froze on his lips. You were aware. Not a query. A declaration. Slowly, he closed the book. His normally assured hands shook a little. Indeed. How much time ago? 3 years. Learned it in a jail in Louisiana. Silas felt she was seeing him for the first time when she gazed at him. A good-looking face. Brown eyes that pay attention. His temples were a shade of gray. The guy she had complete faith in. Why? I fell in love with you. He stood up, attempting to come closer. I was frightened of losing you. Don't you dare? Her voice was soft, yet it sounded like steel. Silas, you dare not mention love. You took advantage of me. You were only trying to find a way to reach me with all of this talk about books and stories. No, everything was genuine. Every single syllable. Each and every. She continued, almost whispering, every touch was poison. Rowan, you poisoned me. In every manner. He opened his mouth to speak, but she stopped him with a raised hand. What's the worst thing, you know? I did adore you. I let her voice to stutter for the first time in my life. Silas turned around and headed toward the door. She halted at the door itself, without looking back. You will be moved to the high-security facility tomorrow. I hope you'll feel comfortable there. Silas, please. His remarks were interrupted as she shut the door. It was chilly and gloomy in the hallway. Water trickled in a metronomic rhythm there. 1, 2, 3. Silas took the personnel file for Rowan Vexley out of the safe in her office. She now recognized the clues and the descriptions, the strange omissions in the medical records, and the move from Louisiana for medical reasons that she had previously overlooked. When she signed the transfer order, her hands were steady. She continued to write with the same ease. The letters were the only ones that seemed sharper, like little knives. Jace Monroe didn't even raise a question when she got the order the next morning. All conceivable words were halted by something in her superior's expression. Silas didn't sleep that night. Sitting in her office, she gazed out the window at the jail yard coated in snow. The guy who murdered her, the man she loved, was sitting in a jail somewhere. Slowly, calculatingly. He smiled as he said, she seldom ever utilized the service firearm that was in the desk drawer. After taking it out, Silas waited. The finest way to enjoy revenge was cold. She was more aware of it than others. She also had a strategy. The scent of chlorine and panic filled the high-security facility. Rowan was aware of what was ahead. He had spent more than 15 years in different jails and had learned to read the signals. Smirks were visible on the faces of the 2 guards who escorted him along the bustling hallway. The walls reverberated with their obscene jokes. A narrow bed covered with gray, clean sheets, a basin with peeling enamel, a toilet without a lid, and large, thick metal bars that separated the world into before and after. The new cell was half as big as the previous one. One of the escorts smiled and slammed the door, saying, "Welcome to hell, pretty boy." The most violent convicts, including rapists, murderers, and prison gang leaders, were housed in this block. Their screams, harsh cries, laughs, and threats were audible to Rowan. Gideon Rourke, guilty of 3 murders, was in the cell across the hall. Nolan Stroud, who had killed 2 guards in Leavenworth prison, sat to the right. "Librarian, hello." Someone yelled, "How do you feel about our lovely suite?" Rowan said nothing. He remembered Silas, standing like a statue in the library, erect and still, regarding how her voice had shaken when she had spoken love. For the first time in his life, he may have genuinely loved a woman because of the fact that he truly loved her. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the stroll in the yard took place. A separate corral with a double row of barbed wire surrounded the maximum security inmates. Rowan sensed the intense, critical, and antagonistic looks. Gideon Rourke, the boss's favorite, looked like a huge shadow with a scarred face when he heard you. "Well done. It's none of your business," Rowan simply said. The strike was delivered quickly and expertly to the solar plexus. Rowan hunched over, his lips suckling cold air. Harris leaned down to his ear. "Mine now. Everything that takes on here is my concern." The guards acted as if nothing was there. Rowan knew this was just the start. The jail was already abuzz with rumors about his romance with the warden. For guys like Harris, the chance to put the upstart in his place was a gift from destiny. Rowan lay on a rough bed in the evening and listened to the noises coming from the cell block. A prisoner was yelling like a bad dream somewhere. The keys of the guard jingled. A malfunctioning faucet was dripping water. He recalled the library, the quiet of the reading room, the smell of old books, and the cozy evenings spent with Silas. Now it all felt like a different life. Nearly a dream. Nolan Stroud's voice broke through the wall. "Hey, Vexley, don't you already know what they're going to do to you?" Rowan was aware. Those who slept with their superiors had no place in the prison hierarchy, particularly if it resulted in controversy. During lunch the next day, someone unintentionally bumped his tray. His robe was covered with hot soup. In the shower, his soap vanished. Small-scale bullying is a sign of bigger problems. Every now and then, Jace Monroe passed his cell. She remained a second longer than usual, but her expression was impenetrable. It seemed like a condemnation, but she really loved you. Rowan saw that the guards were passing his cell less often toward the end of the week. He understood what that meant. He was in for a surprise. Friday night, he penned a letter to Silas. He wrote 3 pages in small handwriting, tried to explain the inexplicable. He told her about his illness, about his dread of loneliness, about how it was difficult to resist her strength and vulnerability, about how every word of love was real. He presented the letter to the young guard, giving him a concealed pack of smokes. He said he would share it. Rowan, however, was aware that Silas would never read it. On Sunday, during lunch, Harris saw him. The guy grinned slowly and expectantly as he gave a little nod to someone behind Rowan's back. Rowan knew the moment had arrived. He had the option to request protection. Negotiation could have been attempted. He was Vexley, however, for some reason. Perhaps it was redemption. Maybe it was simply exhaustion. He spent most of the night gazing into the cell's darkness. The lady he loved who had betrayed him was sitting in his office somewhere at the other end of the jail, and she now wanted him dead. "Forgive me," he said into the darkness. But there was no response from the darkness. On February 15th, the morning was very clear. Earlier than usual, Silas Creighton showed up to the jail. She met briefly with the personnel, signed paperwork, and checked the mail. Her right hand periodically brushed the desk drawer containing the revolver, but no one noticed. At 7 in the morning, Jace Ramsey started working. At one time, she saw Rowan Vexley sitting on his bunk, looking awake as she passed his cell. His face was strangely displaying a combination of resolve and dread. Dr. Alaric Voss started her rounds at 10 o'clock. She heard Gideon Rourke conversing quietly with his other inmates as she made her way inside the high-security cell block. She shivered at the fragments of speech. She considered alerting her boss, but she decided against it. It was none of her business, after all. It was unusually calm in the jail by midday. The inmates were whispering to each other. They were tense guards. Everyone seemed to know disaster was on the horizon. Rowan reported having a severe headache around 2 o'clock and requested to see the infirmary. He went down a side hallway on the way. Inadvertently, the guard who was with him fell behind by a few minutes. There was nobody in the library. Rowan touched the book spines as he moved carefully between the shelves. The quiet, the subdued light from the towering windows, and the scent of paper were all still there. Now, however, it seemed to be the scene of a drama nearing its conclusion. He's in the library. It was a strange penmanship. She used a lighter to burn the paper after folding it 4 times. Jace Monroe watched as Harris led a group of inmates along the corridor. They strolled with a calm, certain gait, their faces expressionless, as if they were certain of their destination and its purpose. She looked away and started going through her papers. A brief, awful scream that sounded like a man trying to say something but failing was heard in the library at 3:30. There was silence after that. Silas sat through the documents methodically in her office. Her hands were relaxed. She breathed evenly. Her inner stress was only shown by her whitened knuckles. A teenage guard discovered the corpse around 4 o'clock. Rowan was among the volumes strewn between shelves. He had a damaged face that was unrecognizable. His chest was discolored by many knife wounds. As he examined the corpse, Dr. Alaric Voss noticed an odd detail. The deceased man's hand held a book, The Persuasion of Jane Austen, a worn-out hardback. Watching Harris and his men go back to their cell block was Jace Monroe. Their hands were clean, their robes nicely buttoned. Only their eyes gleamed with intense eagerness. At 5 o'clock, the investigators arrived at the prison. Silas received them in her office, cool, professional, with a perfectly even voice. She gave succinct, straightforward answers to queries. When the investigators brought up the murder scene, she briefly covered her eyes, but no one noticed. As she explained the state of the body, no one saw her lips trembling. Only Jace Ramsey, who was standing in the office's corner, saw that the supervisor never once mentioned the slain man's name. It seemed as if Rowan Vexley had already turned into one of the countless ghosts who prowled the dreary hallways of Stonegate. The jail had returned to its normal order before dusk. Fluorescent lights illuminated the murder scene, transforming blood into black spots on the old linoleum. But only in the library, where the police were working, was it dark. Silas Creighton gazed at the snow-covered yard outside her office window. In her desk drawer was a loaded revolver. It was never used by her. She was not required to. It turned out that revenge was best enjoyed cold. The morning after the murder, detectives Elias Thorne and Briar Quinn showed up in Stonegate. For 15 years, Thorne, a big guy with a black hair streak, had focused on atrocities committed in prisons. Quinn was the exact opposite of him. He was little, red-haired, and had green eyes that looked keen. They silently examined the murder scene. There were still dried bloodstains on the floor, toppled shelves, and scattered volumes from yesterday night's tragedy at the library. Weird, Quinn mumbled as he crouched next to a bloodstain. Elias, look. The shelf units have angled spatter. He was struck from head to toe. Thorne gave a nod. By the time the big strikes came, he was already on his back. It doesn't seem to be an impromptu altercation in jail. It was an execution. Dr. Alaric Voss was the first person they questioned. As she described the autopsy findings, the young lady was trembling and scratching the chain of her spectacles. 23 wounds from stabs. Many head traumas. However, his wrists have some intriguing handcuff markings. He was bound. What was the number of persons that committed the murder? According to the kind of injuries? For more. Jace Monroe was a challenging witness. With a quick response, she glanced over Quinn's head. When a murder occurred, where were you? In the administration building, reviewing documents. Were you able to spot anybody suspicious? Detective, everyone in jail is suspicious. Thorne saw her momentary hesitancy while speaking about Silas Creighton. The warden was last in line. She greeted them in her office, calm, well-groomed, and with a straight back. Did Mr. Vexley work at the library once? Indeed. When he got there, he was moved there. A week before his death. Why was he moved to a high-security unit? Infraction of the regime. She spoke without faltering. Quinn kept a close eye on her. She found something about her superior's behavior strange, like a well-rehearsed performance. They had their first suspect by the evening, Gideon Rourke. He was questioned for 3 hours. When a murder occurred, where were you? Inside my cell. I have a dozen witnesses to provide. Every minute of it. Do you have an alibi? Detective, there's always an alibi in jail, particularly if you must. Quinn and Thorne stayed up late reviewing the testimony. Quinn spread out the pictures of the crime scene, saying, something's wrong here. Examine the victim's hand for the book. Convincing others. Why that particular one? Perhaps random? There are no accidents in prison, particularly in homicides such as this one. They were unaware that they were being observed. Silas saw the investigators make their way to the automobile from her office window. She appeared like a ghost in the glass. An envelope with the results of her most recent HIV test was on the desk. She made no attempt to open it. It was preferable to keep certain things a secret. As Jace Ramsey delivered the nightly report, footsteps echoed outside the door. Silas turned to face the door, her shoulders straight. The game was just getting started. Briar Quinn had found her first lead on the third day of the inquiry. She looked over the surveillance video and saw an odd trend. For cameras in the library's corridor were out of commission for 30 minutes at a time on the day of the murder. Thorne was informed that it was not a coincidence. The killing was planned with assistance from an administration official. They began to delve more. In the week before to the murder, there were odd alterations to the guard duty schedule. A number of seasoned wardens had been sent to other units. Rookies who were unfamiliar with the internal regulations took their place. The convicts' questioning had devolved into a silent game. They all seemed to be reading from an unseen screenplay. Nothing was seen. Nothing was heard. Was present in the cell. Just one prisoner, a young man with a neck tattoo, said nonchalantly. It was a present for the warden, according to Harris. He was discovered with his skull smashed in the shower room 1 hour later. A miracle kept them alive. Quinn and Thorne asked Dr. Alaric Voss again. She was more anxious than normal this time. What do you know about the connection between Mrs. Creighton and Mr. Vexley? I am unable to talk about patient medical records. Quinn gently reminded her that the matter at hand was murder. Alaric Voss abruptly informed her of the test findings, Silas's test, Vexley's diagnosis, and the supervisor's transformation after the results. An image was starting to take shape. Motivation, retaliation. A well-thought-out murder committed by others. However, there was no evidence. There was silence from Harris and his men. The sentries looked away. Between her employer and the investigators, Jace Ramsey acted as a barrier. Gazing over the evidence board, Thorne said, she considered everything. Used the system against itself. Quinn made his way to the glass. With a commanding tilt of her shoulders and assertive gestures, Silas Creighton was speaking to a gathering of guards in the jail yard. What's the worst thing, you know? Asked Briar in a low voice. She cherished him. She would have shot him herself if not. They looked through phone logs, examined emails, conducted staff interviews. Nothing. There isn't any concrete proof. Just circumstantial evidence and supposition. Gideon Rourke grinned after the final inquiry. Detective, sometimes awful things happen to evil people, particularly in jail. Thorne and Quinn sat in an empty office on the evening of the 9th day of the inquiry, examining file folders. Quinn said, "We are certain she did it." Thorne said, "Knowing doesn't mean proving it." On the table with the book Persuasion in a dead hand was a picture of a murder scene. A parting note from the victim or the murderer. The sound of heels tapping steadily and clearly filled the corridor. Silas Creighton moved like a queen through a castle as she made her way through her jail. She had prevailed. She was aware of it. A new legend about the warden who knew how to wait was being whispered by the prisoners as they moved from cell to cell in the deep prison corridors, and was able to get revenge. Exactly 1 month after the incident, the Rowan Vexley murder case file arrived on the district attorney's desk. Detectives Quinn and Thorne presented all of the evidence they had gathered, including forensics, witness accounts, and camera video. The DA slammed the folder shut and shouted, "Not enough. Everything is circumstantial. On the first day in court, it will be a complete failure." He was correct, and they knew it. Silas Creighton had created the ideal plan. Not in direct touch. No clear directives. Just strange events and coincidental events. Despite being given additional time for murder, Gideon Rourke remained silent throughout the whole interview process. His co-conspirators also said nothing. Extra time isn't the scariest thing in the prison world. Silas went back to work as if nothing had occurred. She continued to conduct meetings, review paperwork, and maintain order. Only suddenly did something new appear in her eyes, something deadly and frigid. The library has undergone renovations. The volumes were placed in their proper locations by the new librarian, an old guy with a low voice. Persuasion's loudness was the only thing that had vanished. It was now part of the evidence. The only surviving witness to the incident was Jace Ramsey. She watched Silas alter as if something inside of her died every day and was replaced by something else. More difficult, darker, Briar Quinn entered the warden's office on the last day of the inquiry. "Don't you know what we know?" "I said," she said. Silas said, "What matters in our work is not what we know. It's what we can prove." They gazed at each other for a long minute, two women on different sides of the law, but so similar in their concept of justice. A year went by. Stonegate went about its daily business as usual. Silas Creighton continued to manage the prison in a tough, effective, and faultless manner. Her posture was as straight as ever, but her gray hair had gone completely white. She sometimes entered the library in the evenings to stand between the bookshelves and stroke the book spines, maybe remembering, perhaps just considering the fine distinction between hatred and love. Additionally, there was a file with an unresolved case someplace in the Department of Corrections archives. Detective Quinn had scribbled the following on the last page: "Justice isn't always served by the law. It may sometimes manifest as suffering, treachery, and retaliation. Furthermore, no one can predict the greater cost of falling in love and being deceived, or of seeking vengeance and losing oneself." The matter was resolved. However, the tale serves as a warning that even love may turn into a lethal weapon within a jail.